Hello, and welcome to yet another retro channel. What you're about to see is a real build. Not even the names have been changed to protect the incompetent, aka me. This is probably going to be either a comedy or a tragedy. You see, I've only ever done a little bit of SMD soldering before. A resistor here, a capacitor there, I think one IC. So I really have no experience at this, no aptitude for it, no ability or talent for it. So let me say right up front, what you're about to see is not meant to be a class in how to do SMD soldering. This is simply my attempt to do so. And what we're working on today is the TZXDuino Reloaded version 1.5 Nano. And what this is a device that uses an Arduino Nano to play back TZX, CAS, TAP files as cassette audio data it's aimed at the Sinclair Spectrum, at the Amstrad CPC, and the MSX line of computers. So you see there's going to be an Arduino Nano on here. There are two little ICs, a bunch of capacitors and resistors, switches, a micro USB port for power, or it can be powered from the Nano. And here is a TF slot or an SD card slot. There's a switch that has something to do with an amplifier that's built into this, a couple little LEDs, more resistors. And there are both a 3.5 millimeter audio jack and a 2.5 millimeter mono jack, which takes the remote control signal. So for instance, with the Amstrad CPC, sometimes the CPC will stop the tape playback and then restart it after a certain length of time. I think that was something to do with copy protection. But that's what we're going to be building today. So to get started, we'll start with capacitors. And we're going to start with capacitor 1. Before we get started, we're going to do a little cleaning. We want to make sure that our board is as free of oils and contaminants and fingerprints, things of that nature as possible before we begin the soldering process. So I'm just using some isopropyl alcohol, 99% IPA, and I am cleaning all the pads. We'll also wait for this to dry before we move forward. One of the problems that I've found with SMD soldering, and I've seen other people have the same issue, is with keeping the work steady while you're working on it. As you can see, it's slipping everywhere right now. I had actually considered a couple of ways to do that might help, but I'm not sure either of them are going to work out. What I was thinking about first of all was using blue tack and just tacking the corners of the board down underneath to the surface of the microscope platform. But I think I'm going to be using hot air in this, at least to some degree. And of course, hot air will heat the board to the point where it might melt that blue tack, and I don't really want to do that. So my next thought was to use magnets to sit around the different different edges of the board to hold it in place. However, I found out that this is non-magnetic. It must be made of aluminum or some other non-magnetic material, so I can't use magnets. So I'm just going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. Now, we have our soldering iron, and I'm using a pretty broad tip here for what I'm doing. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tin the pads that we're going to be soldering our first component to. And I'm using some nice chip quick solder. I'm using a 0.38 millimeter solder, so we have a nice fine solder. And I am going to use some, hopefully this will come out, some flux on the pads. And then I will tin the tip of my soldering iron with the solder, and then come in and carefully tin the two pads for the capacitor that I'm going to put in. So there is that tinned. Now I need the capacitor. And I'm going to need my very tiny pointy tweezers for this. I will put the a link to the place where I found this project. It's a GitHub repository for the TZXDuino Reloaded. It has the Gerber files for the boards. It has the bill of materials so that you can go and order the parts. And I got those Gerber files. I uploaded them to PCBWay to have them produced. Of course, you can use your PCB manufacturer of choice. I always have such fun dealing with these tiny little components. I have big sausage fingers, and that doesn't do well for getting these components out. I will need 3 of these. So there's 3 of those. I've already verified these against the bill of materials. These are the correct parts for this position. Oh, I just lost it. Well, fortunately, I have a bunch of them. I'll find that later. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a little more flux. Ooh, or a lot. And I'm going to bring in the heat gun. I have the heat gun set to 400 degrees Celsius with a 20% airflow. And what I want to do, melt the flux and wet the solder on that position. There we go. And then I will pop the cap in place. And then we will a little more flux and try to get that cap to, by capillary action, surface tension, move into its correct position, hopefully. And I'm going to come in with the iron again and just make sure. I don't think that's quite in position yet. Move it just slightly. More flux. Maybe a little more solder would help. Like I said, I am not experienced at this at all, so forgive my obvious mistakes. Try this with the heat gun again with a little more solder on the pads. Let's see if we don't get a little more movement when it wets. There we go. That looks like a success. Might be a little too much solder, but rather too much than not enough. Let's make sure we're good and tight. We are. So I'm now going to take a little IPA and clean up the area. And prepare the next position, which is C2, which is probably, yep, right there. That's going to be a, these are both going to be decoupling caps for the ICs. And then the third one of this size will be C6, which, where's C6? Oh, there's C6. Looks like a decoupling cap for the SD card reader. So C2. Okay, there are our 3 capacitors. Now let's give the board a good cleaning because we've got tons of flux on here. Okay, we are going to move on to resist, or no, we got more capacitors. Sorry. Let's put these capacitors back in the correct bag so I can identify them in the future. Now, C4. Where does C4 go? Okay, C4 goes right there. That was probably a mistake, as I have a resistor that goes in the middle of those two, R1. And let's see if I can do this. Well, C3 is a little out of position, but I think it'll do the job. We'll leave it at that. Now we will move to 2 LEDs. Start with the LEDs in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead of myself and tin both sets of pads. Resistors and capacitors can go on either way, but obviously LEDs have to go on so that the light faces up. And I'm not entirely certain which way that is. Actually, I'm not at all certain which way that is. I'm going to need to look these up. Looks like it goes on this way. Now, resistors 2 and 3. A couple things went right. Okay. Do a little cleaning again. Okay, now back over. That's resistor 1. Now we need resistor 5, which is right there. And again, I think that one looks good. Resistors were the easy ones. Okay. I think I put this one. And where is it? There it is. I think I put that one on upside down. Hopefully it won't matter. Okay. That's all the smallest components. All right. Now, I think the ICs should be next. ICs will be a little different. What I'm going to do with them is tack down a corner, get them in the right position. And then I will solder the rest of the pins individually with the soldering iron. Do that. Probably want to switch my tip. As usual, it's important to get pin 1 in the right position, and it looks to me like pin 1 is denoted by a little circle right there. So that's going to be pin 1, and according to the notch on the silk screen, pin 1 is going to be here. So I'm going to be soldering pin 1 in place. Okay, apparently this is the part where the comedy comes in. Oy. No movement, and I can't see any bridges. Let's do a clean up, make sure. Okay, I do not see any bridges, and everything seems solid, so that I see is in place. Now, this one I believe is a voltage regulator. So, okay, I don't see any bridges. Let's check the pins. Make sure they're solid. And they seem to be. So, that's all our surface mount capacitors, all our resistors, all our diodes. Now I think we need to find a USB, micro USB port that fits. This is supposed to be an assortment of different kinds. I don't really see that, but let's figure this out. Maybe. Let's see if this fits. That does indeed fit. So let's go ahead and do the surface mount pins. Should just be a matter of soldering them in place. And then soldering the mounting points. I said, this is not a lesson in SMD soldering. Make sure our pins are strong. Seem to be. And all of those connection points look, mounting points, ground points look good. Okay. And now let's see about ETF connector, the flash. See if I got the right one of these. Well, it looks like that'll work. I think I need to change tips back though. And at this point, almost everything I have left is through hole. So okay, now what I'm going to do, I need to put in these pin sockets, and I'm going to cut them to size. And I'm going to use an old dead IC from my dead parts bin to make sure they're lined up straight. And then there is the header for the OLED screen, and I'm going to use some blue tack to get that straight. Okay. That OLED has square pin headers on it. I think I'm going to have to switch those out for round ones. Now let's see if we can find the Arduinos. There's several of them. I just don't know where they are. Okay, so off camera, I had to program the Arduino Nano with the correct firmware, and I'll admit I'm not at all experienced with programming microcontrollers. So I had a bit of a time getting things working. Now, what you do, the Nano will connect to a PC or a Mac via USB. You don't need to use one of those little USB to serial adapters for this. You can connect directly with the USB, and you run the Arduino IDE, and then you load either the TZXDuino firmware or the Maxduino firmware. Now, I was unable to get the TZXDuino firmware to compile, and I had enough trouble getting the Maxduino firmware to compile because it kept telling me it was missing this library or that library, and I had to keep installing libraries. I finally did get it to compile, and I flashed the firmware onto the Nano. Another thing I did have to do, if you probably figured this out, the Nano also had square pin headers, so I had to pull those pin headers off and put round pin headers on it. I believe that the proper solution to that is I was supposed to solder the Nano and the OLED screen directly to the board, but I chose to put in the pin headers. It actually has come in handy, particularly with the OLED, as I was not sure if there was a problem or not, so I resoldered a couple of the SMD components that sit underneath the OLED screen, but didn't make any change, so I guess there wasn't a problem after all. So I now, as you can see, have the TZXDuino hooked up to the Amstrad CPC 464. I have the audio cable, audio output going to, I believe it's this one, the 3.5 millimeter jack that we installed in an earlier video. The 2.5 millimeter jack is going to the control port, and those are wired internally. Those ports are wired over to the cassette PCB in their proper positions, and I've done some testing, and this does work to an extent. I have found that some CDT files don't load, but others do. So I'm going to give you a demonstration now. You can see when you boot the TZXDuino, it comes up to this menu if you have an SD card inserted. If there's no SD card, it'll tell you there's no SD card. But if you have the SD card inserted, you'll come up to this menu. I don't know how much you'll be able to see of this, but you have 5 buttons at the top. Up, down are your menu navigation. Stop is either stop playback or go back in the menus if you've gone down into the file directory system. So stop will go back. The play button and a root button. The root button will send you back to the root directory of the SD card, and if you're already at the root directory, it'll bring up a menu of some configuration options that you can set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move to a directory I have on here called CPC. Hit play to move into that directory, and then you can select files by moving up and down. I haven't had a lot of luck with a lot of these. Batman did load, so I could load that for you. Arkanoid, I think, loaded, so I could try that one. Let's try Batman, though. I'm pretty sure that one's safe because I just loaded it. So what you do is you select the file that you're going to play, and then on your CPC, now I have the DDI5 installed here, and I'm set to Parados. So right now, any load command I make would try to load from a disk drive. So what I have to do is switch to the tape system by hitting pipe tape, and pipe is shift and the @ key. Enter, and now I'm in the tape system. And now I can do my control small enter to do the load. Now it wants me to press play on my tape and then press any key. Now you'll notice when I press play, the TZXDuino goes into paused mode, and it's now under the control of the control signal from the CPC. So it says paused. Now I hit any key on the keyboard and you'll see it started playing. And now it's just a matter of waiting about 5 minutes. So I will speed you through the load process. Hopefully this will work this time. As you can see, it is successfully loading the splash screen. And now it's loading the actual game data. I am a bit unsure why Batman is carrying a shield in the splash screen. A bit weird. As this is progressing, you can watch the OLED screen, and there is a percentage played back, number of seconds, and you can see what block is being loaded. I haven't been able to find anything on what these bottom row of information indicates. It says 3850 M:on and %on. So I'm not sure what those mean. There isn't a lot of documentation on either the TZXDuino Reloaded or the Maxduino software available. There is a small user manual for the Maxduino software, but it doesn't explain everything. We're at 70%, 71%. Coming up now on 4 minutes in, 80% completed. Okay, just over 4 minutes and 40 seconds, and the game has loaded. Sorry about that. Little double sound going on. I have no idea how to play this game, so I'm not going to go too far with it here. But all right, so you've seen that has successfully loaded on the CPC. Now I want to give a shot at loading something on the ZX Spectrum 48K. So I'll be right back when I have that set up. Okay, and here we have the TZXDuino connected up to the Sinclair Spectrum. Now, I did find a problem, not a problem, but something that has to be watched out for. If you watched my video on the Spectrum, and you remember the portion where I attempted to use my cell phone as a tape data input source, and I found out that I couldn't use my cell phone because the level wasn't strong enough, and I had to end up switching over to my tablet. That issue seems to also crop up with the TZXDuino. Now, the TZXDuino does have an integrated amplification circuit, so if you have the amplifier bypassed, the signal level isn't strong enough for the Sinclair, so you have to turn on the amplification signal, or the amplification circuit. Once you do that, it will load, at least most things, or some things. I haven't had success with everything that I've tried, but here's a good example of one that does work. Is Spy versus Spy, and I will type load, quote, quote, on the Spectrum, and enter, and then then we have to manually start the playback. And as you can see, the Spectrum has recognized Spy versus Spy. Something else that I messed up on the original Spectrum video, and I did put it in a pinned comment underneath, but I did say that the Spectrum only has its internal speaker as an audio output source. And it didn't have a jack for audio output. That's not technically true. When it's not in use to save data to a cassette drive, the mic out port on the back of the Spectrum becomes an audio out. So right now, if I switch on the audio, which I've got muted at the moment, you'll hear the tape data that's coming through. So, and in game, that also handles game audio output or whatever audio output the Spectrum is trying to produce for you. You see, we've got gotten to and past the splash screen for Spy versus Spy, so we're continuing to load. We are 30% in at just over a minute and a half. Let's see. Some of you might be happy to note that when I had switched over from the Amstrad CPC, which takes a 5-volt center positive power input, to the Spectrum, I did remember to reverse the polarity, and I also set the overcurrent protection down to 1 amp as opposed to the 1.4 amps I'd been using previously. As I told someone in the comments, the 1.4 amps came from a photo someone sent me of the original Spectrum power supply brick that provided up to 1.4 amps, but the Spectrum itself never draws anything close to that. In fact, at the moment, loading a cassette, it is drawing 0.565 amps, 565 milliamps. So I did remember to correct my mistakes from the past, and we've got a nice working Spectrum now. 87% complete, 260 seconds. We're getting close. The game should be starting up soon. While that finishes up, I should also mention I did figure out, I said earlier I didn't know what the 3 indicators at the bottom of the display are. I still don't know exactly what the third one is. The first one is the baud rate that the TZXDuino will transfer data at. The second one, which says M:"off right now, that's motor control. If that's on, that means that the computer can control the playback and pause through the control input on the board. If that's off, it bypasses that and you have to handle playing manually. The third one is a setting. I'm not sure exactly what it does. All 3 of those settings are in the configuration menu that you get to by going back to the root and then hitting the root button again to get to the menu. As you can see, the game has started playing. We've loaded successfully. I'm not going to try to play this. I have no idea how to play Spy versus Spy. One of these days I'm going to sit down with these games and figure out how to play a lot of the ones that I'm using as demos so that I can show you. But let me switch the sound back on here. And you can hear that the sound is coming in through the Elgato, coming out of the mic port. So there we go. I made a thing. And I don't think, as I said at the beginning of the video, I thought this would be either a comedy or a tragedy. I don't think we hit tragedy. There may have been some comedic moments watching me try my hand at SMD soldering for the first time of any real significance. There would have been more comedy if I'd let you watch me try to program the Arduino. But we got through it, and we actually have a working device at this point. and I am very pleased with myself. So, thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this, if you got a laugh out of it, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. That, again, helps the channel greatly, helps me out. Leave a comment below in the comment section. I love to interact with you guys, and again, that also helps the channel out a great deal. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell. That way you get an alert when I post a new video, assuming you want such a thing. Share the video, if you would, to your social media, to your friends, and let them know it's there if you think they'll be interested in it. Speaking of friends, please be sure to go over to my friends, our little YouTube Retro Repairers group. It's Captain Commodore, Lee, Joseph Retrobits, Joseph, Neil of Retro4U, and Steve of 8-Bit Retro Refix, and now Peter from 8-Bits in the Basement. Speaking of those guys, this Sunday, which would be July 30th, 2023, we are holding yet another live stream. Just a chat session, not a repair session, just where we talk about our experiences with retro and what we've heard out in the community and what might be of interest to folks. We do take questions and comments from the peanut gallery, so feel free to join in. That will be held, as I said, Sunday, July 30th, 2023, from 2:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 11:30 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, or 7:30 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And we are having a guest this week, this month, I should say. We have invited, and he has graciously agreed to join, Rudy from Rudy's Retro Intel. He's a Canadian YouTuber, and he's also been doing a series lately on the Sinclair Spectrum computers. So we'll be having him on and get his history and his take on things and his perspective. So we'd all be glad if you would join us for that. Let's see, that takes care of that, and then I have to thank my patrons. Their names are splashing up on the screen right now. If you'd like to join and as a patron, the links for that are in the description below. And I think that'll do it. So everybody, please have a great week. Stay healthy. Be safe. And we'll see you next time. Thanks. Talk to you later. Bye.